So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end as per Yirmiyahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Yirmiyahu the prophet, we then make a simultaneous line with Daniel, where then we understand the time of the restoration period from Yirmiyahu and also Daniel, and quite honestly, what's going on in the world as far as the Islamic State, the brothers of Yitzhak, the older brothers, and the brothers of Tabernacling, as they are then making their moves Mid-East and also Northern Africa. It is truly very important studying the whole instructions, because it gives us very precise movements of events during this time of war. Then on the other side of the situation came out a very important article regarding then Luxembourg and Amazon. They are having problems with taxes. Then, as it was explained many times before, this truly is a situation where the country won't be able to get a hold of these, because it relates with freighters. So then, as we then explained before many times, as far as taxing or taxes, these truly should be involved with the freighters as a whole, and not the country trying to come up with a system of its own. As we understand, Daniel has showed us many kinds of ramifications from these systems, where we find then in a later time knowledge shall increase. So any kind of taxation is related with the forward motion of trade of this time of the restoration period. No longer countries can come up with systems and then having taxes gathered from the individuals. You must have a direct link with an existing system. Then the countries, they are dependent upon the freighters' systems so they can get taxes from. That's the way it's going to be, liking it or not. As we read then this article, Amazon is a very big store, online, virtual store. And then around the world there are many kinds of monetary systems can be used for purchases. Obviously, some of these they can't deduct the taxes because they have no link with central banks. These truly gives us an understanding as a line, and then holes as you walk through this line, because the time has not come yet for the linkage of governments and freighters, but truly it is coming very shortly. Should countries be concerned with the system of their own? Absolutely not. It is a waste of time. The freighters, they have already a very important and very precise way of tracking packages, lining up only taxes to be taken from these systems and then providing a system of its own as far as nations are concerned. It is truly a waste of time. These freighters would have to reroute their entire information system of packages through the government, and the freighters simply won't do it. because governments are notorious for not being precise and not being trustworthy with such important and sensitive information. So the only way of making these work is giving the freighters the ability of including in their own systems the petitions from several countries, so then when the label is printed, then taxes are instantly deducted. That's the way it's going to be played. Now then, as far as we can understand, nations are very concerned with how they're going to charge taxes, but the time has not yet come. There is, however, very important news regarding Alibaba. It became the most important system of the United States and in many countries of Asia and China. However, in order for this link of taxes being activated, then the investment icon must be there in the system prior of this taxation system. It is somewhat laborsome, but the understanding is simple. However, the elbow grease work coming out of it is very extensive, because it varies from country to country. So then, as far as we can understand, dealing from country to country, then nations had to put their heads together to find out how they're going to deal with the signal, the internet signal, when a person is doing trade via computer in their countries. As was said before many times, module must be used. Now, how are they going to break away every time, for instance, a customer comes to their country and then turns on the system, places the card in? How are they going to then verify these data coming in and out? Much more so when they make a deal using a virtual monetary system not linked with the central bank. So you can understand the enormity of the situation. However, these problems at this moment, they are absolutely 100% solvable. Because when we read later the holy instructions related then with Daniel, related with Galah, related with Yeshayahu the prophet, we know this system is going to work like a charm. And it will. And each country shall receive its own share. At this time, nations are thinking their older ways, the time of deceit of 1,000 years. Countries, they try to come up a system of their own to include new policies where it won't work. It only works when the government gives authority to the freighters. The freighters then, they are the priority, and most of the resources coming from these new deals, and they are growing very fast. Internet trade is absolutely warming the economy. But then, as far as when a person is investing in a certain country, what a person is doing over there, because he must have a reason for the person to do trade in a certain country. A person simply does not travel from a country to do trade via computer if there is not some sort of an interest in a physical land, either linking up with a bank or then sending materials from the specific country somewhere else. And each of these steps must be monitored. However, the monitoring capability comes from the freighters, not from the governments. Thus then, governments must set a specific deal with the freighters. When this truly is done, then obviously a bit shortly before, then the icon of investment then is established. So then, as far as we can understand from the Northern Kingdom, the Soviet Union, yet gathering its forces, linking up their countries of old, and coming as a very strong force of arms, then the USD also will be ditched from their system in shortly 24 to 36 months. As far as the Chinese system came, as it was then placed years ago, at least a couple of years ago, it was given a specific number of months, and as it was reduced, it came during the period of time. You can start listening these video audios and you can verify for yourself. But because of these, then we are confronted with another situation regarding then the Islamic Brothers, the ISIL, or then the Islamic State. They do have a very strong, solid place in the earth. They do. And in fact, they are on the prophecy of Daniel the 11th chapter. Because these groups, the Islamic State, is not only fighters fighting against each other. They are a force of an anointing started with Ibrahim. So these movements of these Islamic people, they won't ever stop. They are going to be there until the end. When we read the Holy Instructions, you find the Islamic Brothers precisely speaking of the Holy Instructions on the verse 10 of the 11th chapter of Daniel. You find them there. Yet the movement of these Islamic Brothers are yet in its infancy. They must develop a much broader line of fight, and in many countries, most importantly Northern Africa. And then there are some relationship with Egypt in Northern Africa, and then from then on the Northern Kingdom, and then South Africa and the south side of the Northern Africa, and then the relationship from then on with the violent ones beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. At the moment we're on the very tip of the iceberg, a person might say. Each of these events, the Islamic Brothers, then the Egyptian forces, then the forces of the West, then the Israeli forces, the Iranians, and then, speaking of trade, China, Alibaba, and the taxation system, and this system of charging taxes either via then sending money and receiving from many sources of virtual monetary systems, and then making a deal with the freighters and using cards and computers and laptops. Each of these are events that are synchronizing very perfectly in the first chapter of Ezekiel. That's the big machine of Ezekiel. But then, should nations be concerned with taxation? Yes, they should. But contrary to the normal, governments have a tendency to take over and come up with their own systems. This time, it is the reversed. As it was said many times before, they should be concerned of what not to do. But then let the freighters simply use the policies of the government where they are at, and only make sure they charge the proper taxes. A person might say, how do they do this? Simply, when a purchase is made, either with a system linked with central bank or not, when there is specification of the item and price, these must be standard. Sometimes on ship papers, or then the shipment papers of a package, most of the time you don't find, for example, the price of the product. You have the column of price normally at 0. But then this time it must have. So then the product, the price, and taxation then is instantly placed on the label, and then when the label is printed, instantly taxation is deducted. So based from these, the nations can get what they are wishing for, because lots of taxes are being neglected online. Because of these, then we read the 10th verse of the 11th chapter, the relationship of those who are then fighting in the Middle East and Northern Africa. Later on I'm going to evaluate these further, because then the movement of Mr. Putin making a further deal with Egypt, it must have also a link with Israel. Because later on we find that the covenant is being played with a scenario where then the holy city already exists. I'm going to retrieve this information, backtrack, and find where it's at. But because Daniel was a true prophet, and because of the backing of Yirmiyahu, we can simply read the content and context. They are not tied up with words. They are tied up with layers. And these can truly be found somewhat easily. So great news. Please stay tuned. Much more coming up.